Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Whew. It's going to be a tough video today. It's just going to be a lot for me to go over. Today is the last day of content, actually. I saved the most interesting or weirdest for last. Completing Section E today, non-narrative horror. We're going to go over horror games that are tabletop. Last time we went over horror video games, and today we'll go over tabletop games, either role-playing games or board games. There's a few board games that I want to go over. The role-playing games, and then I'm going to have to go over some personal crap because it dovetails and I can't not go over it. I have my iced tea to bolster me through this. It's going to be weird talking about myself just because the shit that I have to talk about is not very pleasant to talk about, but you know, I had to do research on it as well, so onward and onward. Horror games, horror board games, and horror role-playing games. There's, again, the division that we talked about last time. When we were talking about horror video games, there were games that were horrific, designed to scare the person playing it, and there was games that were horror in that they're horror, horror themed. Instead of a first-person shooter video game, where you're an army guy and you're shooting other army guys, you have a horror-themed first-person shooter game, where you're an army guy and you're shooting, or just a guy with a lot of guns, and you're shooting zombies that are coming at you. That's essentially Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead. Or about 100 other themed things. Dead Island, where you know, instead of going around, fighting bad guys, you're fighting zombies, and you're trying to figure out how to kill zombies by setting your sword on to electrifying your sword, or whatever. There's this division of horror trying to scare the person playing it, or trying to get the person playing it into a horror mindset where serious stuff can happen to their character, and horror theme where you're in a board game and you're going through a haunted house, and your token on the board might get knocked off the board and have to start at the back at the beginning. There's a lot of those kind of things. What was called Witch Witch was essentially Mousetrap on, the game Mousetrap, where the weirdo mousetrap traps your mouse. It was essentially that, but with but you're in a haunted house and the witch's thing will knock your token off the board, so you have to start over. There's a couple other ones. Most of the board games that actually have board, you're trying to get to the top of the mummy's pyramid. But if you roll a whatever and you you draw the community chest card, and then say as the mummy gets you, you have to start back at the beginning, or you have to go directly to jail, etc. It's one of those kind of things where it's horror themed, as opposed to being, this is actually trying to scare you. There were a few that sort of come closer to trying to scare you as the player. Most of them involve more video board games, which is, you have the board set up and you're all playing the board game, but you have to put in the DVD, which will tell you, every so often it'll tell you, hit this button on the DVD and a random event happens. and it might be scary because the guy is dressed up in makeup on the DVD. The Gatekeeper, I think, was one. Atmosphere, but fear spelled with F-E-A-R, Atmosphere, The Gatekeeper. Another one was The Harbingers, which is also another video board game. Oh, I think that might be the same guy. Yeah, it's another Harbingers, is another Atmosphere series of games where the gatekeeper's dressed up in makeup and is trying to be spooky. So those are trying to spook you out, but most of them are just, you have a board, and the board is a haunted house, and you have to get to the end, but if you draw the wrong card, the monster will get you, and you have to start over. That sort of thing. Yeah. That's the majority of the board games. There's a Wikipedia category of horror board games. There's a few that, aren't necessarily the same. Yeah, most of these are like Cthulhu-based Arkham things. There's, a Dracula hunting game where the Dracula tries to make an army of the undead, and the Dracula hunters try to kill Dracula. It's strategy games. There's actually, I actually like strategy games. There's one called Ghosts, which was a very interesting strategy game, where you have 8 ghosts and you have to try to capture the other player's 8 ghosts. But 4 ghosts are good and 4 ghosts are bad. You have to try to get the good ghost without getting the bad ghost. Interesting stuff for strategy. I like strategic type games, so that would be interesting to me. But is it horror? No, it's just move your pegs forward. It's battleships, or move your pegs forward and try and connect 4 as strategy. It's Connect 4 with, but the tokens are ghosts. Slightly different, but that's the gist I got from it. And those are, the Hasbro, the Mattel, those kind of board game companies that also make Candyland. They're not really going out to try to horrify people. They just have a horror theme to them. Curse of the Mummy's Tomb was the one where you had to go up to the top of the pyramid and get the elixir of life while not drawing the mummy card, which would knock you back to the beginning or something along those lines. There's a couple others. City of Horror, one called Zombicide, that are, if you do a Google search for horror board games, those are the 2 that popped up. Again, they seem like just horror theme more than anything else. You don't actually get horrific setting until you get into the horror role-playing games. Sort of like the Dungeons and Dragons, but you can imagine a Dungeons and Dragons game. Most people who don't know what role-playing games are, Dungeons and Dragons type thing where you're storyteller. One guy's the game master or storyteller in some of these, and you are trying to achieve your goals in the role play. Against the game master who's running the show, or with the game master running the show who's playing the antagonists. You can see that you could change Dungeons and Dragons knights and dragony type settings into a horror type setting, and people have. The first... I don't even have the thing up. The first one that did this was back in the 70s. The Call of Cthulhu game. Fantasy role-playing in the world of H.P. Lovecraft. There was also board games. Arkham, in the same sort of setting. That's not the right page. Arkham Horror, in the same sort of settings. For the board game side of things. This is the role-playing side of things. This was actually pretty highly reviewed by one of the guys I saw doing it. I did a couple searches for videos of people doing role-playing game reviews. Game Geeks was one that was actually pretty good. There's Steve Jackson games. Steve Jackson games, they're known for doing the Munchkin series of games, and the Munchkin series of games has a Cthulhu expansion pack, which is not necessarily horrific, but it does have interesting horror theme to it. I gotta look up GURPS again. And then there's GURPS. Generic Universal Role-Playing System. That's what GURPS stand for. I wasn't sure what the acronym was. Also by Steve Jackson. There's the GURPS system, generic... What did I say it was? Generic Universal Role-Playing System. Again, it's like a Dungeons and Dragons type role-play, but the generic rule set for all of them, and then there's a horror GURPS, where you're in a such and such horror universe. And of course there's a Star Trek GURPS, or a space GURPS. If you wanted to pretend to be a space explorer, or there's a fantasy GURPS if you want to be a knight slaying dragons, etc. It's generic, but the roleplay system is the same for all of them. And actually another one that I saw, I talked about the Yogscast last time. There are guys who play video games, and they did a live action video of them sitting around playing this game called Ultimate Werewolf. I'll put the link up in a moment. And it was pretty cool looking. Each person had a card. They had their own deck of cards for the game. And, one person would be... They're all villagers. And a couple of them are werewolves. One of them's the pack leader. One of them's, and then in the village who aren't werewolves, one of them's a hunter. One of them's a soothsayer who can investigate whether someone's a werewolf or not. And they, role play out silently, because you can't, the werewolves have to collaborate without everybody else seeing who they're going to attack each night, who they're going, and the villagers have to find out who they're going to lynch in the morning to stop this werewolf menace. So if the villagers lynch other innocent villagers, they're going to lose the game, and if the werewolves, don't attack the right guys, they might be discovered by whoever. And it was an interesting little video. It was Yogscast Strippin' who put up the video. And it was fun. It was entertaining. And then there's also World of Darkness. World of Darkness is by White Wolf, which is the story a role-playing game company, storytelling company, and it is essentially just in a horror world. This is how you get your getting into your true horror storytelling games. And of course, as I said before, non-narrative horror, it's not really non-narrative horror. The games are called storytelling games. That's what they call their system. Role-playing games, storytelling games. Some companies call them one thing, some companies call them another. World of Darkness is essentially you're in a world where there's ghosts, there's vampires, there's werewolves, there's wizards, mages. There's people who were created, like Frankenstein or the Golem. There are people who are taken by the fairies, the changeling. There are people who play with death too much, Geist. And there's hunters who are trying to hunt the monsters and occasionally just shoot the people, the humans. I actually got into this when I was in college. My old roommates were really trying to get into it, and we bought the books. We actually never got around to getting into it, but I bought the books and I really got into the system. It's a neat thing. It's creepy as hell. It has the potential to be creepy as hell, but you need those 6 people to play it, or 4 people to play it, which we never really got around to doing. It was weird for me to get into it, because I found out later. Actually, I have the books here. World of Darkness. There we go. And then there's all this scary-ish stuff inside. I mean, the pictures are frightening. You can get really dark stuff. People with really messed up faces, which are monsters, and that sort of stuff. What are we at here? I guess nothing's... Yeah, here we go. That's a nice little picture. Sending someone down the hill. And of course I have... Oh. Nope, wrong way. There we go. Oh, these are also very heavy. 1 second here. There's the one for World of Darkness, the original werewolf, the mage one, the vampire one, and the Promethean one. And it was very hard for me to get into this series. World of Darkness, the original book, came out right when us guys were getting into it. And the vampire book came out a couple months later. I was really hesitant to buy the vampire book, because this is called New World of Darkness. This is going to get into my weird story that I was going to tell you about. And there was an old World of Darkness that came out 10 years before that. I'm not really sure. I'm not familiar with the old World of Darkness. And that had a stigma that, for me personally, that I didn't want to be associated with. Vampires, in general, I don't want to be associated with. Werewolves I'm obsessed with, and I'm okay with buying the werewolf book. And the werewolf book's a lot cooler, just to be honest. And the mage book's pretty cool too. The Promethean one, which is the created guys, it was alright. And the vampire one's okay. But in 1996, let me get the notes up. I was a student in high school. It was the week of Thanksgiving in 1996, and I actually had pink eye and was out for the day. I was hanging out at my grandparents' house because my parents worked, and I had pink eye. And my uncle, who was living with my grandparents, came in and said, "Hey, do you know these people?" Threw me the newspaper. Now, Now, I looked at the newspaper, and I saw that one of my friend's parents had been killed. Both of them murdered. And the suspect I also knew. And the suspect and the girls whose parents were killed, and a bunch of other kids, not that from around where I lived, were on the run from the law and were caught for another 4 days or something like that. This is the werewolf killing of the werewolf clan or the werewolf cult or whatever of Eustis, Florida in 1996. Rod Farrell was the murderer of Naomi, Ruth, and Richard Wendorf. Get their names right. And Rod Farrell I had known in middle school. He actually busted my lip in middle school because we were roughhousing in the gym, and I fell from us roughhousing, goofing around, nothing serious, and I busted my lip open. I think I got detention and he got Saturday school or something for that because we were being idiots. But of course he continued to be an idiot, and he left school, went up to Kentucky. His mom moved up to Kentucky with him, and he got involved with people who were playing the old version of World of Darkness, but they were LARPing it, and they were pretending to actually be vampires. LARP is live action role play. And he sort of believed it got to the point where he disconnected from reality in several major ways. Got this extreme complex of seeing first animals and then people as non-real. And he ended up killing a couple of cats, and then went and killed the parents of my friend Heather. Yeah, and so vampires and vampire role-playing games were really not something I wanted to get involved in. At all. But, me and my buddies in college, so this was 10 years later, 96, 2006, no, it was not 10 years later, it was 2004, 2003, 7 years later, 6 years later, wanted to get into this because we saw the book and it seemed like a neat book, and it was a neat book. We actually never got into it. I did become sort of into it a lot, but I'd never found anybody to really play with. And of course, I'm not detached from reality, nor are 99.9999999% of people who play these games or who LARP either. My cousin LARPs in England in a fantasy setting like dragons and witches and stuff like that. And obviously she's not detached from reality. Much. No. Not in a violent way or anything like that. And of course, just like the people who stabbed a couple of months ago, who stabbed the people in the name of Slender Man, the video game, is certainly not White Wolf's fault or the people who are playing these games' fault. Recently, actually not too long ago, there was one of these joke stories about a Republican politician in Florida also, who had pictures released of him playing a LARP version of a vampire. which was kind of funny because he was trying to run on this family values thing, and he pretended to be a 3,000-year-old vampire, or 300-year-old vampire, or whatever the hell it is. And, who drinks blood and has promiscuous sex, because there's a lot of sex in this series of games anyway. And it was sort of weird to see him trying to balance himself as a Republican family values guy while still being a fake vampire on the weekends. And of course, politicians have as much right to pretend to be things on their days off as anybody else. And obviously this Republican guy wasn't detached from reality like Rod Ferrell was. I saw a documentary on him today when I was doing research on it. And it had interviews with him, and he's just such an idiot. You really got this sense that he was just trying, whenever they put a camera in front of him, he said, "Oh, I'm the king." He's like he feels that he's the king of the world, and he just tries to talk and sound all intelligent, but he's not. It was said something incredibly stupid, like he mispronounced the word. He didn't know the proper pronunciation of repeatedly. It was like repeatably or something, because he was trying to sound intelligent and well-read, and it just fell flat on his face. Which is fine, because he's a cockweasel. But the first video up here is the video for the documentary about the killings. The second one down is the review for the World of Darkness book. And the third one is the people playing Ultimate Werewolf, the Yogscast people. Because I think they're both, all three of those are good videos. Yeah, it's the World of Darkness. The White Wolf, of course, has nothing to apologize about this stuff. That one asshole who took their games too literally, killed someone, and ruined my sophomore year of high school by extension. Ruined a lot of people's sophomore year, or junior year for some of them, high school by extension. My high school that year was just a train wreck. It was just me, and another guy were the only two one day at lunch. We had a group of us that hung out at lunch, and then one day it was me and the other guy were there alone because everybody else was in court as character witnesses, because Rod Ferrell had gone to see, Heather Wendorf's boyfriend was there. Heather Wendorf was removed from that school year because she just, no one was wanting her to come back. No one wanted. That sounds bad. With all the drama going around, it just wasn't helpful for her to come back. She actually went to another school and finished her high school there. But, Heather Wendorf's boyfriend was there in court. Another one of our buddies was there in court because they went and saw him that day. One of my female friends was in court as a character witness as well. And, it was just me and this other guy. I was like, oh, I guess everybody's in court today. I guess we're having lunch together alone. and everybody else, because we were these outcasts anyway. Part of the reason that we were in the group, because we were outcasts. Oh shoot. We didn't really hang out with anybody else, and we were the weirdos. I had an art class with Heather, and they really dragged her name through the mud, and they just went after her on everything. They brought her into court twice, which is double jeopardy, but they were just trying to do anything to get her in shit after she lost her parents. They were trying to make her an accomplice. It was sick. And then, of course, everybody looked at us, this group, who was Heather's group, Heather's friends, and, sort of looked at us askance, and it was rough for us as well. Not anywhere near as bad as having your parents killed. Not trying to even go there, but I'm just saying we were in some shit. High school sucks as enough as it is, but it's even worse with that sort of crap going around. And, every day it was like, oh, me and my buddies, when they weren't in court, it was just, oh, yeah, shit's going down, huh? Yeah, shit's, fuck. It was just a train wreck. My sophomore year, their junior year, because they were a year ahead of us, ahead of me. And of course, my mom worked with Heather's best friend's parents as well. And, I don't really want to say anybody's name. Obviously, if you go on Wikipedia and look up Rod Farrell, you'll get some of these people's names. But I don't want to call them out. Some of them I'm still friendly with. None of them I want to. I'm not going to change the names to protect the innocent, but I'm not going to name the names either. Yeah. And of course, when you're 15 and all this shit's going around you, you sort of shut down a bit. If I were braver then, I would have really gone out of my way to defend Heather more. That's one of my big regrets in life, actually, is I didn't. I did see her when her friend, that my mom's friends with, mom's parents, her best friend at the time, parents worked with my mom. And I knew her as well, and I went to her wedding. And Heather was there, being best friends, and they stayed good friends as well. And I tried to apologize in general terms of, I should have defended you more. And, I don't know, my mom says she knew who I was and ignored and pretended she didn't, or she just didn't remember who I was, because she blocked out a lot of high school, who would blame her? But, I still feel that I needed to apologize for not defending her as much as I should have. Rod Farrell's a cock. I don't give a crap about defending him. The two males who are involved are still in prison for life without possibility of parole. Rod Farrell was originally sentenced to death. He was the youngest Floridian ever sentenced to death at the time, but they commuted it to life in prison without possibility of parole. So, yeah. Oh yeah, so that's Old World of Darkness. That's not a good transition, Drew. So LARPers in Kentucky were into Old World of Darkness Vampire. Which I think was Vampire the... And this one is Vampire the Requiem. I think in that one it was Vampire the something. Vampire the Masquerade. They were really into it, a little too into it, and they started LARPing it, live action role playing, and pretending that they were vampires walking around. And then some of them went further and actually literally cut themselves and drank each other's blood, as opposed to the game mechanics. You know, I'm drinking your blood for 20 points without actually slicing them. That's the way the game mechanics go. Simplified, obviously. But these guys were like, oh no, let's slice each other. La 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 la. And then into that sort of group, Rod Ferrell got involved and then got into drugs and disconnected from reality and killed 2 innocent people. Yeah. Alright, give me a second, because that was really tough to talk about. Alright. So, fast forward to 8 years later, or 7 years later, or whatever I said, when my buddies, after college, were trying to get into this game, I was very hesitant to get into... I was hesitant to get into it at all, but I was really hesitant to get into the vampire book. But, of course, I'm a mature adult, so I was able to, look past it. The mechanics of the game are fantastic. The vampire one as well. Everybody can play the game without disconnected from reality. That weirdo media thing about blaming the game when a violent thing occurs, and then the media will always say something like, oh, and he played violent video games, or he played violent board games or something, and it's all nonsense. He watched horror movies is one that's usually happened. Stephen King in Danse Macabre. Do I have it here? I do. Stephen King in Danse Macabre has a thing about, a woman was at a bus stop when someone tried to rob her, and she pulled out a gun and shot him. And people asked her what she was reading when she was accosted by the guy, and she pulled out Stephen King's The Stand. Or some guy killed somebody and wrote Red Rum from The Shining on the wall in blood. Stephen King obviously isn't to blame for this kind of crap any more than White Wolf is for the Rod Ferrell murdering bastard that he is. Idiot, too. If you do watch the top one, the Rod Ferrell documentary, he's such an idiot. It's just ridiculously stupid. He's trying to act so over mature. It's silly. I'm going to be angry for 3 days about Rod Ferrell now. That's the way it goes. Sorry. But, Stephen King makes a point of, it's certainly not the fault of the creator of the content that someone disconnected from reality anyway sees it as a, permission slip to do whatever do awful things. That's nonsensical to hold that point. actually one of the video game guys that I watch a lot, Total Biscuit, when the school shooting happened and they made a point about him playing video games that were violent. He made a big long tirade about, this is not the video game's fault. There's so many video game people who don't commit crimes. There are video game channels on the television in other countries like South Korea, and obviously they're not mass shootings there because there's no access to guns. So if it's a gun control issue, it's a blah blah blah. I don't want to get into that politics stuff at all. But it was a very compelling argument by Total Biscuit. So obviously it's not the content creators of video games or tabletop role-playing games or books or movies or music. I remember the Columbine kids, they listened to Marilyn Manson, so people are trying to blame Marilyn Manson for the Columbine shooting. It's a fucking ridiculous thing to say. Yeah, so I did get this is awful transitions. So I did get into World of Darkness. I don't have the actual character sheets, but I did create 30 or so characters, which are pretty cool. And if I knew people who role played, I would actually really like to play World of Darkness. But the setting is very horror, and you're in this setting as a human, or you can be as one of the creatures. But if you're one of the creatures, there's still worse stuff that you have to deal with. Werewolves, you have to deal with spirits. Vampires, you have to deal with other vampires who are more powerful than you, and anybody with a fire, the ability to set you on fire, or sunlight. Mages, you have other stuff to deal with. Creatures of whatever realm they have to play with. Prometheans have other stuff to deal with. Fairies, the changelings have the fairies to deal with. Geists have ghosts to deal with. Hunters have monsters to deal with. And killing innocent people. Authorities, etc. And there's lots of stuff to. And then the human book, which is the original book, you could play as a human and have monsters to deal with, just ghosts or monsters. It's curses and whatever. There's the point is that all the horror stuff is a possibility, and the storyteller, the person who's running the game for the characters, the players of the game, can bring in anything they want, and it can get really horrific. So I was really got into World of Darkness as a setting. Anyway, I'm letting this run on for a while, and I'm retreading ground. This is my last content day. I'm going to do a couple of review videos. I'm going to do a couple of special topic videos. But this is the end of Section E. This is non-narrative horror, and of course nothing was non-narrative, besides maybe some music. Pardon me. So, yeah, but this is non-narrative horror, the end of the Section E, this end of horror analysis. As I said, I'm going to do some review videos. That's what I'll be doing next time. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching. My name's Drew. Thanks for watching Horror Analysis. I'll see you next time. Oops. I gotta hit the stop button.